All right, tonight we begin in Matthew, the 16th chapter. We have some things that we've already talked about, and then we have some new things I think that you'll find that is very, very interesting. Now, Jesus has been crisscrossing the Sea of Galilee. He has gone from one side to the other, and then he goes back over the other side again. And as we start out tonight, why, he's taking this trip where we have the yellow line right there. If you notice back in chapter 5 and verse 32, that's where he was feeding the 4,000. Then when you get down to the verse 39, it tells you that he then ended up there in the borders of Magadan, and there is where that little black dot is. It starts on. So now Jesus is going across the lake, and as he goes across the lake, it being a route something in that way. That's almost the way it was when he went out and was walking on the water there. Then we open the story in this way. They're out in the boat. And the Pharisees and Sadducees came, trying him or testing him, and asked him to show them a sign from heaven. So now here he's, this would be right before he left, by the way. They came trying him and asked him a sign for heaven. Now we've already talked about this. This is where Jesus then answered and said, "When it is evening, you say it will be fair weather, for the heaven is red. And in the morning it will be foul weather today, for the heaven is red and lowering. You know how to discern the face of the heavens, but you cannot discern the signs of the times." Now, stop right there. As they come to him and they ask him, show us the sign. We're going to see it's a very spatial sign that they were asking to show, but now Jesus rebukes them very severely. They've already asked him this question before. In other words, show us a sign. And he's already answered this question there before. And so he's starting to rebuke them and starting to cut them very, very severely. I want you to notice in verse 4, it said, "An evil and adulterous generation seeketh after a sign, and there shall no sign be given unto it but the sign of Jonah, and he left them and departed." Now, he's told them this before. Now, here we come back, and we talked about this kind of a sign. Here they ask him, they said, to show them a sign from heaven. That's the key. So far, Jesus has been doing these signs, these miracles, showing that he is divine, but he's been doing them by his own power. He will go out, he will walk on the water by himself. He will meet a funeral procession, and he will walk up and raise a dead boy. He's there, he does these miracles, but these people now are coming and they're saying, show us a sign from heaven. In other words, we don't want any of these signs that you're showing us here. What we want you to do in order to prove to us that you are divine would be to be able to give a command to God in heaven. Then you step back, you get out of the way, and let's see if God does what you tell him to do. In essence, that's what they're saying. Show us a sign from heaven. Now, Jesus has already told them the kind of people that it takes. An evil and adulterous generation seeketh after a sign. No sign shall be given it. What he means by that is no such sign as you are asking for. Now, Jesus did hundreds of miracles before. He will do hundreds of miracles after this. But there's only one sign, one miracle that's going to be done that where it's very obvious that he is out of the picture and it is God who is doing it. And he has already told them on a couple occasions what it is. And he said in here the sign of Jonah. And we talked about that sign of Jonah. Remember, Jonah himself was a sign we talked about as he walked through the city of Nineveh, and people looked out and they saw Jonah, and they said, "There he goes, there he is," and we're seeing a living sign that there is a God up in heaven. And in what way was he a living sign? When he was out in that boat, what did he tell them to do? Pick me up, throw me over, and the storm will stop. And so they did everything that they could to keep from that, but they picked him up, threw him over. what chance does a guy have of swimming out of the Mediterranean Sea in a storm that is about to capsize the boats? So God had the big fish to swallow him, brought him up, vomited him on the land, and when he's walking around, he became a living sign. And he was in that belly of that fish for 3 days and nights. And so this is what Jesus is telling them. There shall be no sign except Jonah. In other words, I will be in the heart of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. I will be dead, and on the third day, I'll come out of that grave. Now, I'm foretelling it. I'm telling you right now before it ever happens, so you will remember it. It's hard for us to put ourselves in a situation back there of where they were, but what would you do if I foretold my death and telling you that I'm going to die? That wouldn't shock you at all. But then when I told you, now you watch me. Now I want to tell you that there's something special about me, and it's different from all of you. I've got something that's different from all of you. And so I'm raising myself to this standard in here. You say, well, show us that you're better than we are, Lowell. Show us that you are superior to us. Well, I am. Well, show us that you are. See? Show us that you are. Okay. When I die, you watch me. When I die, you put me in the ground. On the third day, I'll raise from the dead. Would you be watching my grave on the third day? Maybe drive by and see if the dirt is still out there in some way or another. And what would you do if I raised from the dead on Friday and come in and preached to you on Sunday? Walk through that door. You had my funeral on, let's say, Monday. You went out, you saw them scoop the dirt over me, and this next Sunday I'm back here preaching to you. You sure would, wouldn't you? You would look at me and you'd say, what would you say? Yeah, he's the man. In other words, he knows what he's talking about. That would be a sign that I would give you that you could not argue with, could you? In other words, there's no argument at all. See, no argument at all. If I come in here and I do some sign in here, like as we've seen down in Las Vegas recently, pull a tiger out of a suitcase or something like those guys do down there. Now, I'm telling you, I'm better than you are. Now, watch this. I pull a tiger out. Would you accept that? See, I know what you'd do, even if I could pull a tiger out. See, even if I could create a tiger, I know what you would say. See? And you'd say, it's just a trick. See? It's just a trick. But this other, it would catch your attention. That's what Jesus is doing. Jesus, all the way through, is reserving this one big evidence nobody can ever argue about. It is the sign, it is the evidence that proves beyond any shadow of a doubt he is the Christ. And that is his resurrection. Now, what he condemns them about is this. He's walked on water, he's healed the sick, he's done all of these things, and yet this is not enough to convince them when they should have been convinced 100 times over that he was the Christ. And then when they come up and ask for this, in essence, what they are saying is really this. Lord, we know you've done that little old stuff like raise the dead, and that little stuff like walking on water, and that little thing that you did when you cast out all those demons over there and you healed that man that nobody could, all that little stuff doesn't impress us. What we want is the big stuff. Now, Jesus is saying, an evil and adulterous generation seeketh after that. In other words, you have to have an evil mind to think along those lines. And so then he tells them, he said, now it's amazing because you people have a lot of wisdom when it comes to reading the weather. When you see the sky red in the evening, you know it means one thing. When you see red in the morning, you know it means exactly the opposite. So you're able to look out and you're able to see these things, these phenomena, and you're able to say, when that sky is red, if it's evening, here's what will happen. If it's morning, here's what will happen. Why aren't you able to read the signs of the times? Why aren't you able to read what's going on in front of you? I have come, so has John the Baptist. I've raised the dead. I've walked on water. I've done all of these things. I've shown you what that the kingdom of heaven is at hand. I've shown you that I'm fulfilling the Old Testament law. I've quoted you the passages. I've fulfilled them right in front of you. How is it that you people are so smart? You can read the red sky in the evening, but you can't read what's going on right in front of you. And so that's the argument that he's given them. So he then just turns around and walks away again. Okay, in verse 5. And the disciples came to the other side, and forgot to take bread. And Jesus said unto them, Take heed and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees. And they reasoned among themselves, saying, We took no bread. And Jesus, perceiving it, said, O ye of little faith, why reason ye among yourselves, because you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive, neither remember the 5 loaves and the 5,000, and how many baskets you took up? Neither the 7 loaves and the 4,000, how many baskets you took up? How is it that you do not perceive that I spake not of you concerning concerning bread, but beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees? Then he goes ahead and says, Then understood they that he bade them to beware of the leaven of the bread, not the leaven of the bread, but of the teachings of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Now, let's put ourselves back. Try to put yourself back, and you become one of that group of those 12. And you have just gone out, and you have seen him feed 5,000. You've seen him feed 4,000. You've seen him pick up all these basketfuls afterwards. You've seen that he has power over all of this bread that absolutely is amazing. And then you're taking a trip. Now, as you take a trip, it was always customary to take the bread with you. They didn't have cafes back there like we do. Oh, we'll stop off the Sultan Bakery or something of this nature. You took your food with you. You took your bread with you as you're going on a journey. Now, these people are going on a journey. And they get over there, and Jesus then, he brings up the subject and says, Now, take heed of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Now, Jesus' mind is on one thing. Jesus' mind is on those Pharisees and Sadducees that are hypocrites, that are trying to trap him. And he says, now, don't get caught up in the leaven of their teaching. Now, how would you get caught up in the leaven? How is there leaven in teaching? Whether it's false teaching or faithful teaching, there's leaven in it. What does it do? What does it do? It goes into your mind, and it begins to work like leaven, doesn't it? And begins to fill up your mind. And if you accept false teaching, it begins to fill your mind, and in a little while, you're saying the same thing as a false teacher. On the other hand, if you have the leaven of the teachings of Christ, it'll do the same thing, fill your mind with the teachings of Christ. He says, I want you guys to beware of something. I want you to beware of the teachings of those scribes and Pharisees, because they're evil, but they're out to try to destroy my teaching, so you beware of it. Now, when he used this analogy, they immediately came back to bread. They said, oh, leavened bread. We didn't bring any bread, Lord. We didn't bring any bread. And then he turns around and he rebukes them here. He rebukes them, and you have to look at the context of what is just happening. He says, I'm not talking about the bread. Don't you understand I have power over bread? Don't you understand that you don't have to worry about the leaven in bread? You don't have to worry about whether you brought bread, didn't break bread, what kind of bread you brought. Don't you understand that I have the power over bread? Don't you remember the 5,000? Don't you remember the 4,000? I'm not worried about physical bread. He told, I'm worried about the teachings of the scribes and the Pharisees. Do you see why Jesus would be disgusted with them? See? Under the circumstance, they've just left the feeding of the 4,000. And yet, they're concerned about the bread that they didn't bring with them. Now, here's the interesting thing, starting with verse 13. Now, when Jesus came into the parts of Caesarea Philippi, stop right there, and I want to talk about that for just a moment, and I want you to get a perception in here. He goes back up to Capernaum. As he goes back up to Capernaum now, he's going up to Caesarea Philippi. Now, any time that we hear the word Caesarea, we think of that Caesarea that's over on the coast, don't we? That's what we think of, because that's the one the Bible talks about all the time. A couple of times. Well, I'm trying to think of another time other than this time, and nothing comes to my mind of where you read about Caesarea Philippi. But now, we need to understand that there are two Caesareas. There's a Caesarea that's over on the coast. That over there was the headquarters of Pilate and the Roman government, and that's where Herod built his castle, and that's where Paul spent all of his time in prison when he was down there. That's where Cornelius was converted. And so, over and over and over, we hear about Caesarea down there. Now, that Caesarea down by the sea, and that's what they call it, Caesarea by the sea, to distinguish it from the other one up there. But this Caesarea down here by the sea was built by Herod. This was Herod the Great. And it was built by Herod in order to honor Caesar. It's kind of an unusual thing. It's a grandeur of a temple and all the things he made there. And he made them so that they all face out. It's kind of like all of them are facing out toward the west, out toward the Caesar. It's kind of like open arms. Caesar, Herod is trying to win his political favor, trying to show Herod how great he is. So he builds that city there, and he calls it Caesarea. Where would he get the name Caesarea? From Caesar. Caesarea. That's really what it is. So he names it Caesar, really. Now, up north of the Sea of Galilee, 32 miles north of the Sea of Galilee, there is another town. And that town is called Caesarea, and it's called Caesarea Philippi, because it was built by Philip. Now, you remember when Herod the Great, the guy that built the other city, when Herod the Great died, you remember he divided the land up among his sons, and he gave that partial up there, he gave that to Philip, so it's Philip Herod, so what he gave it to. All right, now Philip goes up, and Philip does the same thing his daddy did down on the sea. He builds a great temple up there to Caesar, to try to show Caesar, win his favor of, I'm on your side here, Caesar. And he named it Caesar Philip, is what he named it, of what we would say Caesarea Philippi. Now, up there, Caesarea Philippi is kind of a unique city. It's right at the bottom of Mount Hermon. That would be like right at the bottom of the of Mount Rainier, where the rains and the frost and all that comes down, and it's green, and almost all the land over there in that territory is desert type land. It's hot in the summertime. It just gets to roasting up over 100 degrees. And when the Jews want to take a vacation, or the kids are out of school still today, and so they're going to go somewhere to spend a day, that's where they go, up and around Caesarea Philippi. The city of Dan is up there also. And it's known, as you go over there, it's known as the luscious vacation spot. It's green trees. It's streams coming down. It's cool. It's nice. And so Caesar, Philip Herod, he went up there and he built this city that's up there. Now here's another unique thing about this that we'll need to see concerning it. But I tell you, before I tell you that, let me go ahead and read a couple more verses right in here. They came up to Caesarea Philippi, and he asked his disciples, saying, Who do men say that the Son of Man is? And they said, Some say John the Baptizer, and some Elijah, and others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. But he saith unto them, But who say ye that I am? And this is where then Philip answered and said, Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. Now let's stop there. Here's the thing that really grabs you. It just makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up when all of a sudden you realize where this is and what he's doing. Here's the map, and we have Caesarea down here at the bottom. You take the road and you can go up to Caesarea Philippi. Now, Caesarea Philippi is about 32 miles north of the tip of the Sea of Galilee. It's right up there. You can see Hermon in the gray, and it's just right down there, a luscious place that is down there. Now, as you go up there, and where Mount Hermon is, you come up there. There's where Caesarea Philippi is going. Dan, the city of Dan is up there also. But this is the location of it. Down there is where that's coming in, is the Caesarea that we know. They call it Caesarea Maritima, or Caesarea by the sea. That's Herod the Great, and the other one up there then is Herod Philip built that one that's up there. So that's where we're going to be. Now, here's the interesting thing. It's 32 miles up there. There's not much between the two places. It's just road. Have you ever gone out and just take a walk for 32 miles? Decide I'll go somewhere and I'll walk for 32 miles and take these people with you. So you're kind of wondering, what was Jesus doing up in that part of the country? Why did he go up there and walk up 32 miles that's there? When you walk in, there's what you see. That's it. All of a sudden, you see this great, massive cliff, and there it is. Now we're getting ready to see why Jesus would pick a spot like this to ask them this question that is there. Another picture of the same thing. Now, here's a picture of the god Pan, and you can see him embedded on there. The word Pan means, like Pan America, we fly everywhere. Pan means all in Greek. And so this guy right here, he had everything put together. He was the god of wine, and that meant all the wine bibbers would worship him. He was the god of debauchery. The thing that he presented to the world was debauchery. Everything that would lower mankind, this guy was it. They had that Hercules was part of the myth. You see, Pan is just a mythical god. Hercules was. And so Hercules was strong. He was just terribly strong. Nobody could get Hercules down. But Pan, he challenged Hercules. He challenged him to a drinking duel. And so they drink, see who can drink the most. And they have a big whole floor of marble, what I'm trying to say, a tile floor that's out there that tells the story. Out they get out there. Boy, Hercules really is drinking. And finally Pan drinks him under the table. So the great Pan wins again. He wins in debauchery. Well, this is the area where they were worshiping him. And they made a big temple to him that's up in this area that's there. Here's the artist's drawing as you go up that they show you there, that they have these two great temples. One is to Herod and one is to Pan that's there. You can see the cliff that is behind it that's in there. So there's the cliff. Now, out of the cliff, there's that big cavern, that big hole. And you go over there and you look in that, and it's just a big hole. And out of that hole comes a river. There's a river. It's a pretty good sized river. It would be about that size, quite a lot of water that is coming out of there. Now, the interesting thing is that according to their mythology, they said that's where the gods go in the wintertime. That's where they go in the wintertime. and they called it Hades. Now, you remember what Hades means? The unseen. So they go to the unseen. That's down in the middle of the earth. This is the heathens. This is what they go down in the middle of the earth, and they're down there in this great big river that's in there. And by the way, that's the reason that crops don't grow in the wintertime, is because the gods go down there under the ground, and they're not out here to make the crops grow. And so then in the summertime, when springtime comes, that's when they have all these festivities, and they have the sexual orgies, because they're trying to draw the gods out of the hole, trying to draw them out so that they can get them out there to make the crops grow. And so in the springtime, we need to do all of this and bring those gods out so they can enjoy all of this kind of stuff. When you see that culture, it's just unbelievable. But that's a culture that Jesus lived in. And so they would talk then about that thing as being the gates of Hades then that was in there. Now, we'll see all this begin to put together right here in just a moment then. There's the artist's conception of the temples that were there. Now, all you see is the hole now. But over on your left-hand side, you can see the hole in back of that temple that's over there. And so they built that up there, which I think that one was to Pan. And so the gods would come out, they could come up that temple. This other one over here is a white marble, and that was the temple that they made to Caesar. Herod built that for him then. So as you look at it then, here's kind of what you would find back in those days. There is where the temple of Pan stood. Over here, you see that other hole down at the bottom? That's where the idols and so forth were. That's where Herod's temple was built up there. Josephus tells us Herod erected a very beautiful temple of white stone and white marble in honor of Caesar. So it would be sitting in there. Then they had something else over here to Zeus. And so as you look at this big cliff, here's what they walked into. They walked into these temples of these three great gods. Pan, who is the god of everything. Zeus, who is the almighty God of all gods. And Herod's temple was built there to Caesar. And who rules the world? See? Who can order death of anybody? It's Caesar. Here's where the power is. Here's where the superpower is. Here's where all the power in the world resides, right down here at this. And that's where Jesus walked in. And Jesus said, who do the people say that I am? Now try to think, those 12 apostles and the lowly Jesus, and they're standing there. And you look and you say, boy, what a great God Pan is. Wow, look what Herod did. How great Caesar is. Zeus. Whoa, how great they are. Jesus said, what are people saying about me? Oh, they say you're something special. Why, people are talking that you may be John the Baptist risen from the dead. Others say that you may be Jeremiah. Jeremiah was a very serious man, very serious prophet, and the weeping prophet, and so forth. Or you might be Elijah in there. Elijah was a very strong prophet. So they say that you're probably there, but Jesus said, who do you say I am? Right here at the base of this, all these idolaters would be there. That's where Jesus said, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. How does that compare with all those things that are there? See? All I want us to see is that statement was not made in a vacuum. That statement wasn't made out in the middle of a field somewhere. That statement wasn't made as they were walking down the road. That statement was made where Peter had to make a decision. Here's all the great powers of the world, and here's Jesus. Who do men say that I am? So I said, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus answered and said unto him, blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah. That means Simon, the son of Jonah. When you see the word bar, it's a Hebrew word that means son of. So blessed art thou, Simon, the son of Jonah, for flesh and blood hath not revealed this unto thee, but my Father who is in heaven. Now, this fact that I'm the Son of God is not anything that has come to you through flesh and blood that some man has revealed. But it's my Father who has revealed it unto you. Now, in what way could the Father have revealed to Peter that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God? Miracles. What's the whole thing about? See? The whole controversy in this world here are these signs and miracles. God has enabled me. Peter, blessed are you. God has given you the evidence that you have seen what I've done. You have the ability to comprehend it, and you know there's only one way that I can do what I've done, and that is that I am the Christ, the Son of the living God. See? God has revealed this unto you. Then, he says in verse 18, and I say unto thee, that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. Now, he's getting ready to talk about rock. So let me kind of fill you in here a little bit on false doctrine, and then I'll show you the beauty of the truth here on this cliff. The Catholic Church will tell you this. They'll say here, verse 18. If you ever ask them, where do you get the idea that Peter is the Pope, that the church is built on Peter? This is the verse they'll go to. And they say unto thee that thou art Peter. Now, if you look at the footnote up there, well, it gives you the Greek words down there. The word Peter comes from Petros, and Petros means rock. So, thou art Peter, thou art rock, and upon this rock, now this is false, but this is what they'll tell you, and upon this rock, Peter, I will build my church. So Jesus says he would build his church upon Peter, who was the rock that is there. Now, there's a little problem with that. And the problem with that is this. He says, thou art Peter. Now, I want you to look at that footnote. If you got a footnote right there, look down at the bottom, and it gives you the Greek word in English letters. And what is the Greek word? Say it loudly so I can. Petros. Petros. See the end of that? Petros. Os. See that? Then, and upon this rock, now look at that next one. What is that? Petra. It has a different ending. You say, well, what does that have to do with it? What is the meaning? All right, put your eyes back up here on this cliff. Here, they're down here at this cliff. And what he says then, as he puts this in there, Peter says, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. Then we find this. We find, of course, Pan is gone, Herod's gone, Zeus is gone, all of them are gone there. But Peter says, thou art the Son of the living God. Now, he said, thou art Petros. The Greek word Petros means a detached rock. I have put it down there where all those rocks have fallen off of that cliff. And up there, I'm trying to make an impression upon this Petra. The word Petra in Greek means the massive mother cliff. Now, it's up on this massive cliff that I will build my church. So he said, now, Peter, you are a rock, but you are a detached rock. You're a rock that has fallen off of the mother rock. That would include rocks as big as that first one you see right there, the size of an automobile, down to the one the size of your little fingernail. That's Petros in Greek. Look it up in any lexicon. There's no question about it that's in there. It's a detached rock. And then Petra is that great, big, massive cliff that is up there. Now, what is it that Jesus is trying to say when he says, thou art Peter, thou art a detached rock, But upon this mother cliff I will build my church. Is he trying to say, I'll build it on you, Peter? He's saying exactly the opposite. He's showing Peter exactly the opposite. Peter, you're a rock, but I want you to notice you're a rock the size of my fist. But I'm going to build my church upon a rock that is a bedrock. It's that whole cliff that is up there. Now the key is right there. The way those words end in Petra and Petros, look them up in your lexicon. They're two separate words. The one up there, Petra, means mother rock. The one down there means a detached rock. So what Jesus says is, Peter, you're a detached rock, but on this mother rock, this great cliff, I will build my church. So we say, well, what would that be? Well, down there's Peter. He's a detached rock. Up here is Jesus Christ. He's the big one. It's going to be built on Jesus Christ. Now let's go back and let's look here before we go any farther in here. There's about three things you can look at here. You see Jesus, Peter, and a confession. Peter, who do men say that I am? What's the confession? This is the big thing. Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. Big thing. Blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah. You're a rock. You're a detached rock. But upon this massive rock, I will build my church. So I'm going to build a church on this massive rock. What would the massive rock be? Jesus said, I'll build my church. And I'm going to build it on this massive rock. There's only three things. There's a confession, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. There's Peter who made it, and there's Jesus who's going to build his church. So, it's not Peter. He's made that plain. Jesus is going to build his church, and he's going to build it on this rock. So what's the only thing left? The declaration that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. I'm going to build my church upon that truth. That is the foundation that my church will be built on. And then he goes ahead to say, and the gates of Hades shall never prevail against it. I think that's neat when you look at that big hole over there, and when you understand what the culture, what the heathens thought at that time, of when they thought that Hades is back down in the middle of the earth, and all the gods go back down through that hole and go back down in there, and then the gods come back out again. And what he is saying is, I'm going to build my church upon the rock that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, and all the gods of the world, all the powers that you can put together, whatever it is that you want to bring forth, will never prevail against my church. Just a beautiful, beautiful picture when we see it in that way. Anybody have any question on that? Do you see the point that I'm making? Okay, then the next thing he says is, in verse 19, I will give unto thee the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Now, he just said, I'm going to build a church, then I'll give unto thee the keys of the kingdom. Now, you find out, so far Jesus hasn't talked about his church. He's just bringing up the subject now. I'll build my church, and I'll give you the keys of the what? The kingdom. In the context, he's using interchangeably the church and the kingdom. Now, as you study the rest of the New Testament, you see over and over and over and over and over again that the church is the kingdom is the church. Remember in Acts 20:28, told the elders, feed the church of the Lord which he purchased with his own blood. And then in Revelation 5:9, worthy as a lamb, so forth, who purchased men out of every tribe, tongue, and nation, and madest them unto be our God, a kingdom. And so all of these things come in there. But here's the key. I'm going to give unto thee the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Now, when you give somebody the keys of anything, what are you giving them? What's the purpose? What's that? You're giving them an entrance, aren't you? Here it is. you can get my house. You can open up my house. If you've got the keys, you can open the doors. Now he's telling Peter, Peter, I'm going to build my church, which is a kingdom. And I'm going to give you the power, the keys, to open the doors. You're going to be the door opener. Now when you go to Acts 2, and there on the first Pentecost, when the Holy Spirit came back down, and they invited people to come into the church on the first day, who was it that was preaching? It was Peter. You remember that all 12 of them were standing there speaking in tongues, and finally Peter stood up with the 11 and said, Brethren, give ear unto me. Now then, I want everybody, quit listening to Matthew, quit listening over here to John, give me your attention. And Peter preached the first gospel sermon. And he told them what to do. They said, Men and brethren, what shall we do? And he told them, repent and be baptized. And he said, now the promise is unto you and your children, as many as are far off. And with many other words he testified and exhorted them, save yourself. And how many people obeyed that sermon that day? 3,000 obeyed that day. Peter threw the door open. He used the keys. Now there wasn't a Gentile there. Later on when you come down to Acts the 10th chapter, God sends somebody to preach to the Gentiles, to invite the Gentiles to come into the kingdom. And who is it that God sent? Remember that angel came down to Cornelius? And he says, Cornelius, send down and fetch who? Peter. Simon Peter. Go down and get him and bring him up. So Peter came up, and Peter opened the doors to the Gentiles. So Peter has the keys of the kingdom. And then he says this, you have the keys, and whatsoever thou shalt bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Now this again is where the Catholic Church will take you. If you say, where does the Pope get all of this authority? So he can speak, and whatever the Pope says, then it's bound in heaven. They'll say, here it is, right here, that when Peter speaks, Peter's first Pope, they'll tell you, when he speaks, whatever he says, it's written down in heaven. That becomes law. Now again, here's an interesting thing. This is where Greek comes in, really something on this one. And there's no question about what I'm telling you. To get any commentary, any grammar you want to get, it's very available. What this says is, it's the verb tense that's used, and it's hard to put in English. He said, and whatsoever thou shalt bind on earth shall already have been bound in heaven. And whatsoever thou shalt loose on earth will already have been loosed in heaven. Now think what that means. Instead of telling Peter, you can bind and loose whatever you want to, and then God will make it a law in heaven, it's exactly the opposite. Peter, whatever you bind on earth shall already have been bound in heaven. Well, how can that be? If Peter binds something on earth, the only thing he can bind is what already has been bound in heaven. It's talking about inspiration, isn't it? Whatever Peter says, whether it's binding or loosing, whether he says you can't or you can, whatever Peter says, Jesus says, that has already become law in heaven. Peter, you will not be able to speak anything, bind or loose, except things that God has already bound or loosed in heaven. And so it shows to what extent Peter and the apostles were inspired. They were inspired, they preached the Word of God, but they were bound to preach only what God had already bound in heaven. And so, beautiful, wonderful verse, a verse that has been misused, but when you see the truth of it, wow, then these truths just become out there. Then charged he the disciples that they should tell no man that he was Christ. We come back to this again, we ask a question, why? Why didn't he want them to go out and tell him? The only answer I've got, which is an opinion again. Opinion. I sold one opinion for $1. Anybody want to give me another $1 for? Okay. The only thing I know is these people, Peter and these disciples, have just gone through a traumatic experience, haven't they? They've just gone through this traumatic experience. They've seen this. They've observed this. Wow. Are they truly converted? Do they really understand and know who the Christ is? See? Next week, the first thing off, Peter is going to bawl Jesus out. He's going to turn around and tell him, Lord, that's not the way it is. See? They're not qualified yet. I don't want you guys to go out now and start preaching on your own yet. You wait, see? Because if you go out and start preaching right now, you're not going to get it straight. And so that's, I feel pretty confident that's the thing that he's talking about. Okay, yeah. Uh-huh. Yes. Okay. They'll tell you the same thing I told you. Every Catholic Greek scholar will tell you exactly the same thing that I told you. When you ask me to explain why anybody who teaches false doctrine will read in the Bible where it says something and then turn around and say something exactly opposite, it's hard to do. See, it's hard to do. Remember, we talked about this on faith only in the classroom there. Lots of smart people, but when they read it, they get this set in their mind. Now, the Catholic Church has it set in their mind. Every priest has it set in that Peter was Pope, no question about that. And he has the binding power upon this earth, no question about that. He's the vicar of Christ. When he speaks, it is exactly the same as if Jesus came to this earth and spoke. So when they come to this verse right here, they will just go ahead and gloss over it. The same thing they will when we get to Matthew 23. Matthew 23:8, it says, call no man on earth your father. What do they call their priest? What does the word pope mean? It's father. Why do they do that? See? Why do they do it? Here's what they tell you. Here's the explanation. The explanation is that unless you are a member of the Catholic clergy, you are incapable of understanding what the Scripture says. You're incapable. You can't. You read it all you want to, and you're incapable of understanding it because they have this ability to be able to comprehend, and only they have that ability to comprehend. But when you want to write them and you ask them, is what Lowell said in Greek, is that right? See? Is that the perfect tense there? Yep, it sure is. What does that mean, shall already have been? Yep, sure does. Well, then why would you say this other? Because we understand what it means. Now, I know what I'm telling you sounds so ridiculous that you think I'm making it up. You're saying, Lowell, nobody could make this up. Well, you can't make it up. But that's what they say. They do it in some... Right? That I agree. If you read it right there, just in the English language like that, you'll get that. See, now there are English translations that put that in, and they'll translate it the way I said to translate it. See, and then when you say, well, why isn't it translated that way? I don't know. It certainly back when the King James and those translations were made, that wasn't the big deal that it is today of where they were trying to make it clear. See, that is in there. But that's where you get back into these contradictions again. But check it out any way you want to. You'll find out black's black,